large part of our work is in condominium complexes and townhouse associations. One of the things I've learned about many of these building establishments is that the developer wants the place to look lived in and fully landscaped quickly so that the projects sell. So oftentimes they will plant species of trees that really are much too large growing and stick them in tiny little spaces. Now here's a good example right here. This could be a good tree for a tight location. This is a crepe myrtle, but they've got it crammed in a tiny little spot here. They do have a root barrier around here, so they've got this tree that is starving for space. But some of the other big problems are trees like these hackberries. Now these are very young trees. They're less than 20 years old, and the root systems are just really aggressive. They're going to tear up all the sidewalks, they're going to tear up all the underground utilities, they're going to just make a mess of everything. This is already beginning to lift right here. And the tree is just barely getting a foothold on life. Even this little guy here, you can see, look at the root system here. It's just spreading out all over the place, and ultimately is going to cause a lot of damage. Hackberries are not one of my favorite trees in terms of being in tight spaces, because they do have a lot of problems with a hackberry aphid, and they can leave a real sticky residue all over. But when it comes to dealing with roots, we're oftentimes asked to make some decisions. Now, they don't want to lose their trees and start over, but in the same breath, they don't want to see these roots lifting up all their hardscaping. So I have oftentimes made the recommendation to go through while the trees are smaller and while they're safer and do some preliminary root pruning to try to slow down some of this. There's a good example. Somebody started doing some chopping right there because they recognized that this root was lifting, but they didn't get it all the way through, and it's still regrafted. It might not be a bad idea to do some significant root pruning with a stump grinder along in here, and in essence create a big bonsai. Stunt the tree, severely damage the tree in such a way that it will slow down the growth. It sounds hostile, but the alternative is to remove the tree and start over. So I have done this many times in the past, and it's not good for the tree, but you don't have room for a large tree in this tight little location adjacent to so much concrete. So sometimes a good decision is to do a damaging bit of work to the roots and hope the trees survive. Of course, if the trees are too big and they're a big hazard, then you can't do that. But while they're small, maybe it's a good idea to do a little corrective root pruning to slow things down. It's also important to understand that in some of these complexes, you have to imagine how it was constructed. Heavy equipment came in and just bulldozed the whole area down to hardscape, to just really, really hard ground. The compaction had to be just absolutely perfect to sustain these big buildings. And afterwards, they came in with very little bit of topsoil, and that's what all the planting is in. And consequently, the roots have a real hard time breaking through into that hard under surface. I've dug down in many of these complexes, and you'll dig down maybe a foot, and you hit just almost a concrete-like base. So when you have that kind of an environment for trees and plants to reestablish themselves, they become very, very surface rooted, and they require an excessive amount of irrigation to keep them going. So you've got an added problem with the water conservation measures that we're trying to instill in many of our complexes. And you can see some of the pipes that are sitting here that are keeping this tree going. Plus there's irrigation all the way around. Anyway, there should be some rules and requirements set forth on some of our complexes, and the types of trees that are put in should be well thought out. Look at this little sycamore tree here. I mean, this is horrible. Look at they put in a root barrier all the way around, and the roots jumped out and they're taking off and they're just enveloping this whole area. So, I'm not an advocate of root barriers. I see that the trees almost always win and they always escape. If anything, they encourage the roots to grow higher. Look at the roots over here on this mess. That's from that tiny little tree. So give it another 10 years and this will really be a mess. Well, maintenance of a place like this is an ongoing process, and as your trees get older and older, they get bigger and bigger, and you end up with a lot of long-term problems.